All right, welcome to The Explainer. If you're cramming for your finance qualifying exams, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're going to tear down a paper that's pretty much guaranteed to show up, a real game changer in how we think about what a firm even is. Hart and Moore, 1990.
Okay, let's get into it. Here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with that big, foundational question. Then we'll nail down what they mean by ownership as control. After that, we'll walk through that classic yacht example. You've probably heard of it. Then we get into the nuts and bolts of the model itself. From there, we'll cover the 3 golden rules for optimal ownership and wrap it all up with the one big takeaway you need to have locked and loaded for your exam. So first things first, we're jumping right into the deep end with the question this paper is all about. Why are there firms at all? I mean, why isn't the whole world just a bunch of independent contractors making deals with each other?
Now, that seems like a ridiculously simple question, right? But the answer Hart and Moore give is super specific and probably not what you'd first think. It's not about the people or the brand or the mission statement. No, they argue a firm is something way more tangible.
And this is it. This is the big idea. A firm is simply the pile of non-human stuff that it owns. The machines, the buildings, the computers. And what does ownership mean? It means you have the residual rights of control. So let's unpack that. How does owning things end up giving you power over people? I mean, slavery is illegal. You can't own a person's human capital, but you can own the tools they need to do their job.
And that's the whole trick right there, the right to exclude. If a programmer needs a specific supercomputer to write her code, the owner of that computer has all the power. By controlling who gets to use the asset, the owner gets a massive amount of leverage. It all comes down to bargaining power.
Now, for your exam, this is a really crucial point. This paper builds on their earlier work with Grossman back in '86. But what they do here is take that basic model, which was just, 2 managers and 1 asset, and they scale it way up. We're now in a world with tons of different people and tons of different assets, which makes the whole framework way more powerful for looking at a real company. Okay, let's make this concrete. We're moving on to the famous yacht example. Honestly, this little story does an amazing job of showing how just changing who owns one single asset can completely change the outcome of a business venture. So here are the players in our little drama. We've got a tycoon. He's the customer, and he's essential. We've got a chef, who's the key worker with a special skill, and a skipper, who, well, he can be replaced. And of course, the yacht itself. That's the critical piece of equipment they all need. The entire story really hinges on the chef's decision. See, to make this whole thing work and create a value of $240, he has to sink 100 of his own money into some kind of special training. Let's say learning a very specific kind of cooking that only the tycoon likes. It's a relationship-specific investment, and you can't write a perfect contract to protect it. So the question is, will he risk it? Okay, so watch how ownership completely changes the math. Scenario 1, the replaceable skipper owns the yacht. Well, the chef knows that after he makes his investment, he's going to have to bargain with both the tycoon and the skipper. So that $240 in value gets split 3 ways. The chef gets $80, but his cost was $100. He loses money. So no way, he's not going to make that investment. But what if the indispensable tycoon owns the yacht? Now, the skipper is just hired help. He's not part of the bargain. It's just a 2-way split between the chef and the tycoon. The chef gets $120, which is more than his $100 cost, so boom, the investment happens. The only thing that changed was who owned the yacht. All right, so that story gives us the intuition. Now we're ready to zoom out and look at the formal mechanics of the model, the engine that's running underneath this whole theory. The model's timeline is super simple, just 2 periods. At date 0, everybody invests. They learn skills, they work hard, they come up with new ideas. All of this stuff is really hard to write down in a contract. Then, at date 1, everything's on the table. Everybody gets together to bargain over how to split up the profits they all helped create.
So how do they split the pie at date 1? The model uses a really neat tool from game theory called the Shapley value. You don't need to get lost in the math, but the basic idea is that it figures out your payoff by looking at what you uniquely add to every possible team you could be a part of. It's just a formal way of measuring your bargaining power when all is said and done. And right here, this is the central problem of the whole paper. It's called the underinvestment problem. Because everybody knows ahead of time that they're going to have to share the final rewards, they only get a fraction of the value that their own hard work creates. And because of that, they just don't have the incentive to invest as much as they should.
So, if underinvestment is the disease, what's the cure? Well, the paper's main contribution is to ask, how can we assign ownership of all the assets to make this problem as small as possible? And it gives us 3 incredibly powerful rules for doing just that. You absolutely 100% need to know these for the exam.
Rule number 1 is all about indispensability. Think back to the tycoon. If a person is essential for an asset to have any value at all, that person should own the asset. Why? Because it gives everyone else a stable, predictable partner to bargain with. It gives them the confidence they need to go ahead and make their own investments. Okay, rule number 2, complementary. This is for assets that are like a lock and a key. They're useless apart but incredibly valuable together. The rule is simple. These kinds of assets must be owned by the same person or firm. If you split them up, you create a huge holdup problem where workers have to negotiate with multiple owners, which just tanks their incentive to invest in the first place. And finally, rule number 3, independence. This is the flip side. If 2 assets have absolutely nothing to do with each other, zero synergies, they should be owned by different firms. If you bundle them together, you're just bringing an outsider into the bargaining process who's going to take a cut of the profits without adding any value. That just dilutes incentives for the people actually doing the work. Okay, let's bring it all home. When you walk into that exam, if you only have room in your brain for one big idea from Hart and Moore, what should it be? This is it. This is the bottom line. Where we draw the line between one firm and another isn't random. It's a calculated economic solution designed to get people to invest. By giving ownership of assets to the right people, you can fight back against that underinvestment problem and create way more value. And the most important factor in all of this is how complementary the assets are. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This whole theory was built around physical stuff you can touch, machines, factories. But what happens in our economy today where companies' most valuable assets are things you can't touch, like data, code, or a brand's reputation? How do these rules of ownership and control apply then? That's the big question this framework pushes us to think about next.